So you want to know the truth about shooting film in Japan? Maybe you're about to visit and wondering if it's going to be easy to shoot film there. Well, sit back and pay attention, and hopefully some of the information I provide is relevant to you. Okay, so this is more of a general tip to start off the video. You've probably seen videos pop up on Instagram and TikTok. These videos show what sites actually look like versus what Instagrammers show them to look like. And in my experience, that was very true. Whilst I was able to lean into this for Tokyo, it was rather distracting for the types of photos I wanted to take in Kyoto. Often in Kyoto, it was unavoidable not to have people in your photos unless you were really lucky. What I would recommend is going to sites that you haven't seen on TikTok or Instagram before if you're wanting to be the tourist that doesn't have other tourists in their photos. For myself, I was either lucky or patient getting the photos that I got, considering I was shooting with a lot of low ISO slide film, or as I just mentioned, I went where people were not. Luckily for me, both the Imperial Palace and the Shogun's Castle seemed to have way less tourists, and that was one of the sites I went to, and I got some amazing photos at these sites. The other thing to note is that pretty much in most of Japan, and especially tourist sites or popular areas, there is a ban on using tripods. Which, whilst I understand, is kinda ridiculous, as tripods don't really take up more space than I do, especially in unpopulated areas. But I digress. It turns out I was able to shoot low ISO film, as most of the days were sunny. Even shooting at 50 ISO, I was able to get shots in the middle of winter, but you might not be so lucky. Unfortunately, the land of Fujifilm, in my opinion, is not very easy for film photographers, and I have 6 reasons why. Number 1. I was unable to find a lab that would take 120 film, which is odd, as most of the camera stores use the same Fuji machine that the lab I use back home in New Zealand, and those process 120 film no problem. And this was the case even with stores that sold 120 film. Number 2. The other difficult part was no lab would take black and white film. And I tried, both in Tokyo and Osaka. This is so strange. I've never come across a lab that doesn't do black and white. I've used 6 different labs in New Zealand, and all of them do black and white film. Number 3. They don't do ECN film. Whilst Fuji used to make ECN film, I'm unsure how anyone back in the day in Japan developed it, if at all. I was not able to find this information online. I was hoping on my trip that I would be able to find a lab that would do ECN film. Whilst not as common, thanks to companies like Still, motion picture film and thus ECN has become more popular. And whilst few labs do ECN film that I know of, at least 4 in New Zealand do, but I was unable to find a single one in Japan. Number 4. This one may also be a surprise for some, but slide film will not be developed in lab by any lab in Japan. In Japan, from what I understand, they send the film back to Fujifilm, who will then develop it before sending it back to the lab. A month later, when I was in Auckland, I managed to run into a dude who used to work for Fujifilm in the early 2000s, and said it was a thing then. I'm surprised no lab in Japan does slide film, as they do sell it. Unsure why this is. Could it be Fujifilm hoarding the chemicals? If so, that doesn't make sense from a cost perspective. They would make more money selling the chemicals than having to put money into labour developing the film. For me, this was quite frustrating, as I had about 12 rolls of slide film that I took on this trip. So number 5. So adding on to these issues is that no lab that I came across was willing to send the film overseas. I am not sure how common or uncommon for other countries, but at least for both Australia and New Zealand, I've found labs here willing to send the film overseas. I can only guess they are risk adverse, whereas here we understand that it's a courtesy, as we sit at the bottom of the world and sending packages is sometimes the only option. Number 6. The final reason why Japan is not easy for you to develop film is that the turnaround time is horrific. Often 2 weeks or more. That, coupled with not sending overseas, makes it pretty impossible as a tourist to get all of your film that was shot in Japan developed in Japan. This, along with the other issues that I had, meant that I needed to get all my film developed in China, which luckily for me was on my travel plans. I tried several labs looking for options, so these reasons to me show a common experience. There may be labs that do black and white, slide ECN film, but I could not find out about them online. I couldn't find any common stores or just any film store that you could be referred to or find on Google, or searching forums like Reddit. I was able to find one lab in Osaka who were able to develop 35mm color film. The staff were amazing and they managed to scan rolls in about just under 2 hours. I ended up shooting a few rolls whilst in Osaka that I got developed on the day, which was an experience I probably will never ever get again in my life. I will post the details for that lab down below. As the service in the lab was extremely good, they also did scans which they turned around incredibly quickly. The only downside with the lab is that they wouldn't do old expired film or Harman's new Phoenix 200. Now, on a more positive note, one thing I did very much enjoy about being in Japan was finding cameras. And I checked out so many stores, as much as I could. I did see a few Fuji 680s at a very good price that I would have loved to have taken with me if it wasn't for the weight of the camera, not wanting to deal with trying to send them back home to New Zealand. I will say the stores were not overwhelming. Like, compared to home, they had a lot more cameras, but not really anything mind-blowing. Nor did I find anything that I was really keen on, apart from this Pentax 110, which I picked up for an okay price in Kyoto. You are unlikely to find the most cheapest bargain deal at these camera stores, but you might find something. But also, if you're on holiday and you want a new camera, you might just come across something that you just know you have to buy. Now, whilst I was in Japan, I did have my C220 drop whilst it was in its camera bag. The clip just gave way whilst I was at the Imperial Palace, and at first the camera seemed unharmed, but it started to develop this issue where it was not firing on time. This became extremely problematic for me, as I could no longer trust my camera. So at the same lab in Osaka, I managed to pick up this Fuji 645, which I will do a future video on, as I had medium format film lined up in a few different cities along my trip already, so I needed a medium format camera. And luckily for me, I was able to pick up this camera at a great price, and the Fuji 645 ended up taking some of the best photos on my trip. This is the benefit of being in a country that produced a lot of cameras, that they had such a massive domestic market, that you can more easily find a quality camera in stores and a reasonable amount to choose from. Bar these issues, I did get some great photos that I really like, and I was really happy with how many of the shots turned out, especially because I'd shot with expired slide film. But I would recommend, if you're coming to Japan, to shoot only 35mm color film and not bring with you expired films or films like Harman Phoenix or slide film or black and white or 120, as there's a high chance the labs won't take it. If you decide to shoot with any of those films, you're most likely going to have to take them back through the airport, through the X-ray machines, and either to your home country or to another country to get them developed, which is always a risk. Now remember, this is based on my experience. If you know of a lab that develops black and white, or SEN, or slide, or 120, or expired Konica film, or expired film in general, or Harman Phoenix in Japan, comment below and let myself and others know. It's a hard resource to find, and it could help others and also myself. I hope this video has been helpful for someone who's wanting to go to Japan and shoot film in the future, who may now better be prepared with this information that I've provided as to what or how they should shoot. Anyway, as always, until next time, it's been real, guys.